Good morning. Today we are going to discuss about International Court of Justice. International Court of Justice is another important organ of the United Nations. So before going to the topic about your homework, last time we were learning about the Security Council and I had given some homeworks also. I hope you have learned composition and functions of the Security Council. So today we will learn about another important organ of the United Nations, that is the International Court of Justice. Its short form is ICJ, International Court of Justice. International Court of Justice. It is also known as ICJ. It is the judicial organ of the United Nations. The other two organs we have learned in the previous classes are General Assembly and the Security Council. The General Assembly is the general body of the United Nations, whereas the Security Council is the executive organ of the United Nations, and the International Court of Justice is the judicial organ of the United Nations. It is the judicial organ. Judicial organ means to discharge the functions of judicial and legal matters, the organ meant for discharging all the judicial and legal functions. Settles the dispute. So we learn about composition. Before learning the composition, we learn about the headquarters also. The headquarters of the International Court of Justice is at The Hague in Netherlands. The Hague. Headquarters, The Hague. The Hague in Netherlands. All the organs of the United Nations, there are 6 organs of the United Nations, and all the organs of the United Nations are located in New York except the International Court of Justice. International Court of Justice is located at The Hague in Netherlands. And the court is composed of 15 judges. Composition. It is composed of 15 judges. So total number of judges in the International Court of Justice is 15, and they are elected for a term of 9 years. And elected for a term of judge is 9 years. The International Court of Justice is composed of 15 judges. They are elected for a term of 9 years. We have already learned about Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. And we know that Rajya Sabha is a permanent house. It is called permanent because the Rajya Sabha never dissolves. All the members of Rajya Sabha are never vacating their office altogether, their seat altogether. We know 1/3 of the members of Rajya Sabha retire in every 2 years. So, International Court of Justice is also composed in the same way. All the judges of the International Court of Justice shall not retire or vacate their office at the same time. The judges of the International Court of Justice are elected for a term of 9 years, and 1/3 of the judges retire, 1/3 of the total number of the judges retire in every 3 year. Every 3 year, one third will retire. One third means total strength is 15 and it's one third 5. 5 judges are retiring in every 3 year, and the same number of judges will be elected. And a retired judge is eligible for immediate re-election. Once a judge has retired or his 9 years time is over, then when the next election or immediately the election to the same number of judges will be conducted, and the judge who vacated his office, who retired the year, the same time he can contest. That means eligible for immediate re-election. Okay. So, composition of International Court of Justice, it is composed of 15 judges and they are elected for a time of 9 years. They are elected by the members of the General Assembly and the Security Council, sitting independently or sitting separately. And a retired judge is eligible for immediate re-election. We know that the Security Council will learn this. The 10 non-permanent members are there. They are elected for a time of 2 years, and the retired member is not eligible for immediate re-election. But in the International Court of Justice, a retired judge is eligible for immediate re-election. Once a judge is elected, he will not be acting as a representative of the nation. He is acting as an independent judge. And not more than one judge can be elected from the same nation. Only one judge, or maximum one judge, can be elected from one nation. In order to be a judge of International Court of Justice, one should have some eligibilities, some qualifications. Qualifications are either the person should be competent in international law. Competent in international law means the person has good knowledge in the international law, or the person who wants to become the judge of International Court of Justice must have a good knowledge in the legal matters of that country, or he or she should be eligible to hold the highest judicial office in that country. For example, the highest judicial, take the matter of India. The highest judicial office in our country is the Supreme Court. To be a judge of the Supreme Court, certain eligibilities are needed. And if an Indian citizen is eligible to become the judge of Supreme Court, that is the highest judicial office in India, then that person is eligible to hold the office of, that person is eligible to become a judge of International Court of Justice. Person who is eligible to hold the highest judicial office in a country, his own country or her own country, is also eligible to become the judge of International Court of Justice. So either he should have a good knowledge in the international law, or he should be competent in international law, or he should be eligible to hold the highest judicial office in his own country, is the eligibility to become a judge of International Court of Justice. Anyone is needed, either competent in international law or should be eligible to hold the highest judicial office in his own country. Then international law, competent in international law. Okay, what is this international law, or how is it codified? Disputes, international disputes or dispute between nations are settled by the International Court of Justice, and the International Court of Justice settles the dispute on the basis of international law. And how this international law is codified? The international law is codified on the basis of international customs, and conventions, or based on the opinions and teachings of highly qualified publicist. A publicist means a person who is having good knowledge in international law is called a publicist. So, based on the opinions and teachings of highly qualified publicists, or based on international customs, conventions, or previous judgments, like this, international law is qualified. On the basis of all this, international law is qualified. And on the basis of this international law, disputes are settled in the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice performs three types of jurisdiction. Jurisdiction, that means the judgment, the power of a court of law to examine the law and settle the dispute is termed as jurisdiction. The power of a court of law, any court of law, to examine the laws and to enforce law, to settle dispute. All these are called jurisdiction of a court. So, the International Court of Justice performs three types of jurisdiction. They are voluntary jurisdiction, compulsory jurisdiction, and advisory jurisdiction or advisory opinion. Advisory jurisdiction is also known as advisory opinion. So these are the three types of jurisdictions: voluntary jurisdiction, compulsory jurisdiction, and advisory opinion. So these can be broadly categorized into two: jurisdiction on contentious cases and advisory opinion. Jurisdiction on contentious cases. Second one is advisory opinion. But that is not given in your, that time is not given in your book. Just understand it. So based on our book, we will learn three types of jurisdiction: voluntary jurisdiction, compulsory jurisdiction, and advisory opinion. Now, what is voluntary jurisdiction? Only member nations of the UN can bring the disputes to the International Court of Justice. The nation who is not a member of the United Nations cannot bring any of its dispute to the International Court of Justice. So, if there is any dispute between two nations who are members of the International Court of who are members of the United Nations, then they can bring that dispute to the International Court of Justice, and the Court of Justice will discuss the matter. Then finally it gives a remedy or a suggestion to settle the dispute. So this power of the this power of the International Court of Justice is called voluntary jurisdiction. Whenever disputing nations are bringing a dispute to the Court of Justice, the court has the right to settle the dispute, and this power of the court is termed as voluntary jurisdiction. And based on the nature of the case, the court settles some other disputes, and that power is called compulsory jurisdiction. Compulsory jurisdiction is cases pertaining to the question of law. If there is a dispute on the question of law, if there is a dispute on a law, matters related to law, such disputes are settled by the Court of Justice, and this power comes under the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Again, if any nation violate international obligations, then as a punishment, some fines are imposed, or compensation is to be given by that aggressor, that nation who violates the international obligations. So, International Court of Justice can decide the reparations or compensation for violation of or breach of international obligation. This power of deciding compensation for breach of international obligation is known as compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. If any of the nations violate some international obligations, some international commitments, and for that violation, the International Court of Justice gives or imposes a penalty or a fine. It's called compensation. So this power of the court to impose punishment or a penalty or compensation is termed as, or that comes under the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Then based on the violation of various treaties, also court can decide the matter, and that also comes under the compulsory jurisdiction. Then the third category, that is advisory opinion. Three types of jurisdictions. First, voluntary jurisdiction. Second, compulsory jurisdiction. And third, advisory opinion. Advisory opinion is the power of the International Court of Justice to give advice to the organs of the United Nations and the agencies of the United Nations. Or in other words, the International Court of Justice has the power to advise the organs of the United Nations and the agencies of the United Nations on legal matters, which is known as the advisory opinion or the advisory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. If there is a doubt or a clarification in any of the organs of the United Nations or in any of the agencies of the United Nations, then to get a clarification they can approach the International Court of Justice, because International Court of Justice is the highest legal body and it has good knowledge or complete knowledge on the international laws and legal matters. So the legal matters or matters related to law, if there is any dispute, then the organs of the UN or the agencies of the UN have the freedom to approach the International Court of Justice and they can seek advices from the court. So this power of the court to advise the agencies or the organs of the UN is known as advisory opinion or advisory jurisdiction. But one difference is there between advisory jurisdiction and jurisdiction on the contentious cases. If the court gives an opinion or a jurisdiction on any of the disputes between two nations, the nations have the responsibility to follow the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Whereas when the agencies of the United Nations or the organs of the United Nations are seeking advices, then also the court is giving advice, but it is not compulsory for the agency or that organ to follow it. It's just advices. So either they can accept the advice or they can reject the advice. So that is the difference between this voluntary jurisdiction, compulsory jurisdiction and the advisory jurisdiction. Advisory opinions are not compulsory for the party to follow, whereas jurisdiction on contentious cases are compulsory for the disputing parties to follow. Yeah, that is all about the International Court of Justice. So read the lesson well, and you read on the question answers also and learn the lesson. Only a few things you need to learn is about the three organs: General Assembly, Security Council, International Court of Justice, their composition and their functions. Then another thing you have to learn is the objective of the United Nations objectives. For main objectives mentioned, three objectives. Then 3D: decolonize, develop, and disarm. These three more added. So this also comes as a fourth objective of the United Nations. aims and objectives of the United Nations, then the composition and functions of the three organs of the United Nations. Only you need to learn. So write down the question answers in your copy. Read this lesson well, and then write down the question answers in your copy and learn these answers. Okay, do this work. Thank you.